Naomi Judd's death shocked the world, but what the autopsy revealed was even more disturbing. Scars, silence, and a note that reportedly blamed her own daughter. Behind the glamour was a woman battling invisible pain and a family quietly falling apart. What really happened in Naomi's final hours, and what disturbing truths did she take with her? This is a side of the Judd legacy the cameras never showed. Let's discover. Chapter 2. Naomi Judd, America's country music family. She was one of the most recognizable faces in country music. But behind Naomi Judd's bright smile and glittering success was a lifetime of pain that most of her fans never saw. Her death stunned the world, but it was what came after that left people speechless. The autopsy report didn't just confirm what many feared. It revealed things no one expected. How did a country music legend end up alone, covered in scars, with a farewell note that reportedly blamed her own daughter? And why was a woman so beloved by fans battling demons so dark for so long? To understand what was found in that autopsy report and why it matters, we have to start with the Judd family itself. Naomi Judd wasn't just famous. She was a matriarch of what many consider to be the first family of modern country music. Her rise to fame wasn't handed to her. Born Diana Ellen Judd in 1946, Naomi worked as a nurse in Nashville before ever setting foot on stage. It was only when she and her daughter, Winona, started singing together that lightning struck. Their voices, Naomi's warmth and Winona's power, merged into a sound that felt both timeless and raw. They called themselves the Judds, and almost overnight, they became unstoppable. Chapter 3. The Judds. From the early 1980s through the 1990s, the Judds were everywhere. They released hit after hit. Mama, He's Crazy, Why Not Me, Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days. These weren't just chart toppers. They were country anthems, songs that felt personal, songs that told stories people clung to. In a time when country music was changing, the Judds gave a heart. Over the course of their career, they sold over 20 million records, won 5 Grammy Awards, and earned over a dozen #1 singles on the Billboard country charts. To their fans, they were more than performers. Naomi and Winona were seen as a symbol of resilience, mother and daughter standing side by side, navigating fame together, lifting each other up. But what the audience didn't see was that this image, this picture-perfect duo, was often held together by force, not peace. Naomi and Winona had what you could call a combustible bond. They loved each other deeply, but their relationship was often tense. The pressures of touring, fame, and personal trauma created fractures in their partnership that were kept hidden from the public eye for years. Both women would later speak openly about their arguments, their emotional blowouts, and the long periods of silence that sometimes passed between them. Even Naomi's relationship with her younger daughter, Ashley Judd, was complicated. Ashley went on to become a successful Hollywood actress. Chapter 4. Mental Health Struggles. But she too spoke candidly about growing up in what she once described as a chaotic household. Ashley has publicly shared that she was left alone at a young age and dealt with emotional instability within the family. These weren't tabloid claims. They were facts confirmed by multiple interviews and memoirs. At the center of this complicated family was Naomi herself, a woman who was always smiling in public but was frequently unraveling in private. Throughout her life, Naomi struggled with severe mental illness, including depression, anxiety, and later, bipolar disorder. She didn't keep this a secret. In fact, she was one of the few country artists of her generation to openly discuss her diagnosis. But talking about pain isn't the same as escaping it. Naomi's emotional health was fragile, and as the years went on, it became increasingly clear that behind her glamorous public persona was someone in constant psychological distress. After a long and successful run, Naomi retired from performing in 1991 after being diagnosed with hepatitis C, a chronic liver disease that she reportedly contracted while working as a nurse. Her doctors gave her just a few years to live. But Naomi beat the odds, entered remission, and went on to become a mental health advocate. She wrote books, gave interviews, and continued to appear at public events, always urging people to take mental illness seriously. But even as she fought to help others, she was still losing the battle with herself. Then, in 2022, something unexpected happened. Naomi Judd stepped back into the spotlight. She and Winona announced a farewell tour, a final string of performances to celebrate their legacy. For fans, it was a moment of joy. For Naomi, it was pressure she may not have been ready for. The tour announcement came just weeks before Naomi's death. In hindsight, many who were close to her said she seemed overwhelmed, erratic, and emotionally exhausted. Chapter 5, Naomi's death. But no one was prepared for what happened next. Just one day before the Judds were to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, Naomi Judd was found dead at her home. And when the autopsy report was released weeks later, it confirmed the tragic truth. Naomi Judd had taken her own life. But that's not all it revealed. The condition her body was found in, the substances in her system, and the physical evidence left behind all told a story that was far more complicated and far more disturbing than anyone expected. Chapter 6. The autopsy report the day of Naomi Judd's passing. The autopsy report stunned even those who thought they were ready. It didn't just confirm Naomi Judd had taken her own life. It revealed intimate, deeply unsettling details about her final moments, her physical condition, and the emotional turmoil she may have been hiding for years. It was a medical file, but it read like a confession, page after page pulling back the curtain on one of country music's most iconic figures. The exact location of the wound, the old surgical scars, the list of substances found in her system, and perhaps most heartbreaking of all, a handwritten note allegedly addressed to her daughter Winona, pointing fingers in her final hour. Why would a woman hours away from one of the biggest honors of her life, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, make the decision to end everything? According to the official report released by the Nashville Medical Examiner's Office, Naomi Judd was discovered by her family inside her home on April 30th, 2022 at precisely 10:57 in the morning. Emergency responders were called immediately, and she was transported to Williamson Medical Center. She was pronounced dead at 12:35 p.m., just hours after being found. The very next day, she was scheduled to be formally inducted into the Hall of Fame alongside Winona. The physical details of the report are clinical but devastating. The wound was described as entering from the right side of the scalp, 2.5 inches below the crown of the head, and 4 3/4 inches to the right of the front midline. It then passed through multiple areas of the brain, specifically the frontal and temporal lobes, which govern decision-making and emotion. The object exited 2 inches below the crown of the head and 5.5 inches to the left of the midline. This path, according to the report, was slightly upward and from right to left. Chapter 7. Physical details. No foreign objects were recovered from inside the skull, suggesting a complete exit. These kind of technical details are normally only read by forensic professionals, but in this case, they've been made public, and they paint a picture not only of how Naomi died, but what she was dealing with before that moment. She was dressed at the time in white pants with a safety pin holding part of the waistband, a white shirt, and a blue robe. There were no signs of an outside disturbance. Her hands were not covered or preserved for evidence collection, which typically would be done if there was suspicion of another party's involvement. This strongly indicates there were no signs of a struggle, no suggestion of foul play, and that the scene was consistent with a self-directed act. Investigators also noted a blue bedsheet and pillow, which had been taken with her during transport. Again, all signs that her final moments happened in her own home, alone. But some of the most surprising details weren't about the cause of death. They were about her body itself. The report notes multiple past cosmetic procedures. Naomi had a visible linear scar across her scalp, stretching from just above the right ear across the crown and ending near the left temple. This is consistent with a surgical facelift. She had smaller scars around her eyes, suggesting blepharoplasty and eyelid surgery. Her eyebrows and lips had been tattooed with permanent pigment, as had her hairline. Aesthetic choice also seen in celebrities like Michael Jackson, used to cover hair thinning or to maintain the appearance of a full hairline when wearing wigs. She also had breast implants, as confirmed by both external palpation and internal examination. A tummy tuck scar extended from hip to hip, and additional linear scars were observed on both knees, likely indicating past cosmetic enhancement or surgical correction. Her nails were well kept and coated with French-tipped acrylics, her toenails painted in a soft pink shade. At a glance, It was the body of a performer, meticulously maintained even as she neared her late 70s. But the list of substances found in her system reveals something far more complicated than an obsession with appearance. Toxicology reports showed she had been taking a combination of powerful psychiatric and neurological medications, including venlafaxine, trazodone, primidone, memantine, and MCPP. These are not recreational drugs. They're prescribed for conditions such as major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, insomnia, seizure prevention, and Alzheimer's-related memory issues. Venlafaxine is a common antidepressant used for mood disorders. Trazodone is often prescribed for depression and anxiety, but it can also cause heavy sedation. Primidone is an anticonvulsant, which suggests she may have had a history of seizures or was using it to stabilize mood swings. Memantine is usually prescribed for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, and its presence raised questions about whether Naomi may have been facing early cognitive decline. Then there was MCPP, M-chlorophenylpiperazine, a psychoactive substance known to interact with serotonin levels. It's sometimes a byproduct of other medications, but it's also been linked to altered perception and emotional dysregulation. While not illegal, it has effects that mimic stimulants and hallucinogens, and its appearance in an autopsy typically suggests either the use of multiple interacting prescriptions or complications in metabolism. In simple terms, Naomi Judd was managing a complicated and potentially dangerous mix of medications, each of which can cause drowsiness, confusion, or emotional instability on its own. Combined, they may have amplified feelings of despair. This aligns with what the family and friends had observed in the weeks leading up to her death. Multiple sources close to Naomi reported that she had seemed increasingly erratic, emotionally volatile, and exhausted. The pressure of returning to the stage, despite her fragile health and complex emotional state, may have triggered a psychological crisis. The farewell tour had only just been announced. She was about to be honored by the music world. And yet, all that attention may have felt like too much. One of the most controversial aspects of the report is the mention of a note found near her body. While the contents have not been officially released in full, it has been widely reported that the note contained personal reflections and pointed language, reportedly aimed at Winona. This detail shocked fans, who had long believed that Naomi and Winona, though complicated, were ultimately inseparable. The idea that Naomi's final written message might include criticism of her daughter has raised questions that may never be fully answered. And still, behind all these medical and forensic terms is the same quiet truth. Naomi Judd was in pain. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, she was overwhelmed. She had battled bipolar disorder for years, lived with the aftermath of hepatitis C, and was diagnosed with chronic lung inflammation, which made singing more difficult. The comeback, the pressure, the eyes of millions watching, it was all simply too much. But the most haunting question remains. Why now? Why on the eve of such a massive honor? Why, when she was already halfway through preparing for a final tour? These aren't questions that reports or scans can answer. But what they do reveal is the pressure of performing under a public spotlight, the fragile boundary between joy and despair, and the way a legend can be lost not to scandal, but to silence. A daughter's survivor guilt. I miss her, but we just don't talk. That single sentence reflected something few fans ever saw. Chapter 8. Survivor's Guilt. The intense emotional distance that had defined much of their relationship in recent years. Naomi Judd was known for her public warmth, her openness about mental health, and her charm in front of a crowd. But behind closed doors, things weren't always so polished. Winona and Naomi had toured together for decades, but the connection that had once been so strong had started to unravel long before Naomi's final days. Winona has admitted publicly that she feels what she calls survivor's guilt. It's a psychological response that often follows the unexpected loss of a close loved one, especially when the relationship was strained. In simple terms, survivor's guilt is when someone feels a deep, persistent sense of responsibility for having lived through something that someone else didn't. In Winona's case, it's not just the loss of her mother. It's the way to continue in her career, her life, and even her family responsibilities while knowing Naomi is no longer here. And according to her, that feeling hasn't gone away. What's made this worse is the fact that the two women were not speaking regularly when Naomi passed. There was no big argument, no dramatic falling out, just space, gradual, widening emotional distance that neither one seemed able to cross. Winona describes the experience of losing Naomi not as a single moment of grief, but as a slow, surreal unraveling. "She's at home probably wondering where I'm at, what I'm doing," she once said, her voice shaking. "I think she misses the road." Chapter 9, Emotional Distance. It's a striking statement. Winona wasn't just mourning her mother's presence. She was imagining her somewhere else, still emotionally tethered to the stage. According to Winona, Naomi loved the attention, the production, the crowds. In fact, she believes her mother needed that spotlight even more than she did. "She loves a crowd," Winona said, "even more than I do." Winona, by contrast, has always described herself as introverted, more focused on the music and her family than on public attention. And yet for years, she stood beside her mother on stage, keeping up the image that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. So why were they emotionally distant at the end? Being in a mother-daughter duo, Winona once explained, is nothing like a typical family relationship. It's intense. They weren't just family. They were co-workers, roommates, business partners, and performers. That kind of closeness can either bond two people or create unbearable tension. Even in her grief, Winona's reflections show how hard it is to mourn someone when you don't feel like you got closure. She describes her emotional state after Naomi's passing as a combination of silence and confusion. There were no last words that gave her peace, no parting moment of forgiveness or understanding. And this makes the process of moving forward that much more complex. Publicly, Winona has done her best to honor her mother's legacy. She continues to sing their songs. She speaks about mental health. She has even committed to completing the farewell tour they had planned together. But privately, she has admitted that the grieving process has been far more complicated than people know. She has said that her emotional isolation since Naomi's death has been profound. While the world mourned a music legend, Winona mourned a mother she barely knew how to reach. The two had been through everything together: chart-topping success, world tours, emotional breakdowns, hospital stays, and family therapy. And yet, in the end, there were still things left unsaid. In one of the most emotional interviews she gave after Naomi's death, Winona said something simple but powerful. "I didn't expect to cry. I think just because I'm a mom right now and deal with teenagers and paybacks are hard." Chapter 10, Tragedy Strikes Again. It was a quiet moment, just a daughter looking back. Try to understand the woman who raised her, loved her, challenged her, and ultimately left her with more questions than answers. Tragedy strikes again just when it seemed like Naomi Judd had reached the limits of grief. Tragedy struck again, this time at home. Her husband, musician Cactus Moser, suffered a sudden medical event that left him unable to use the left side of his body. And for Winona, it meant shifting from grieving daughter to full-time caregiver almost overnight. Winona didn't speak about her husband's condition right away. At first, she shared only that he had lost the use of his left side. That alone was shocking. For years, fans had seen Cactus on stage with her, playing drums, moving with ease, laughing alongside her during performances. He wasn't just her husband. He was part of the show. And suddenly, he was a man who needed assistance just to move from room to room. The change was dramatic. Winona explained that their home had to be renovated to accommodate his new mobility needs. Ramps, grips, and specialized equipment became part of their daily reality. But the emotional toll ran even deeper. In one particularly raw moment, she described standing in the shower with him, physically holding him upright so he wouldn't fall. "We're supposed to be doing this at 80, she said quietly. "Not now." Chapter 11,